Hello everyone. Today I'll be discussing about my experience of playing the first Bangalore GrandMaster tournament. I was playing in category B, and I think it's around more than 4 years that I played a classical tournament. So it was good to be back. And talking about the tournament, it was very well organized. We had BC Anand visit, and then there were other grandmasters like Nigel Short, SP Seturaman, Abhijit Gupta, and it was a festival kind of atmosphere. And I'll be discussing my games today, especially round one and two. But before that, I have some pictures that I can show. So these are some of the pictures I got from a common WhatsApp group, and you can see Pishi Anand. Then there's people clicking pictures with short, and then there's Jessie, which is the official mascot. And seeing the energy and vibe of the kids, I also decided to be a bit childish and take this opportunity to click some pictures with Jessie. And yeah, the tournament was very well organized again, absolutely brilliant. The stadium was good. I'll put some other videos of the tournament in the upcoming videos to let show you around. But now let's discuss the games. So I'll discuss game one and two today, which is the first day games. So my game one opponent was Madhav Prasad Prabhu, and this is interesting because I believe this was the best game I had in the tournament. So I was playing from white where I started with e4. And that's mostly what I play. And he played c6, the Caro Kann. So every Sunday, and I haven't done a specific analysis of the game. So I've kept the analysis bar open so that we can analyze these games together. And as I was mentioning, every Sunday we have people visit my place, and I think from the last 2 or 3 Sundays before the tournament, I played four games against the Caro Kann and scored about zero point 0.5, and I was losing that game as well. So taking that frustration into account, I had well prepared. So when I saw the Caro Kann, I was a bit happy, and I played d4, d5, the standard opening. So the difference between the Caro Kann and the French is that in French, black plays e6, d4, and d5. And if it's not an exchange French, it's difficult to develop this bishop because this pawn gets in the way. While in Caro Kann, this bishop is open to come out on this diagonal. So I continued with knight c3. I didn't want to go to a exchange variation in Caro Kann because I feel it's quite boring or drawish. I might be wrong there. Capture, capture, and you can see I'm trying to control the center here with my knight and pawn. And my opponent's objective would be to counter attack the center. He is playing the computer move bishop f5, knight g3. So if somebody attacks your pieces, the best way to defend is attack them back. Sorry. And he saved his bishop. Here I played h4. The idea is that if he tries something like knight f6, I can play h5, and all the squares of the bishop, they are trapped because my pieces are controlling them. So I would win a piece for a pawn. But again, this is very standard opening. So my opponent played h6. And here, since I played a pawn move, my opponent played a pawn move. I didn't actually lose a move overall because both of us played the pawn. Uh, I continued with knight f3. My opponent played knight f6. Here, computer shows the best move is knight e5, but I am more aware of the h5 structure, so I continued with h5, bishop h7, and bishop d3. Then there was this exchange. If he doesn't exchange, I would just capture the bishop, and either his rook or knight have to become passive. And the thing is here, the thing to notice here is that if I directly play bishop d3, we would get the same structure, but my pawn would be on h4. But after playing h5 and getting this structure, black's position remains the same, but white's pawn instead of being on h4 is on h5. That means white just gained an extra move, which is called a tempo. So I can show this is versus this. So you will notice that the difference is just a pawn move of white, and this pawn move gives some space for white, so it's good. My opponent continued with e6. I played bishop f4, and my opponent played bishop d6. So I have played this variation many times, and I was prepared. So I here I had seen knight e5, and I continued with that. Bishop e5, the computer suggests that, and I think it leads to something similar. Captures, captures, and here he should have played queen a5 check, forcing me to play c3 or exchange queens. And the idea with c3 is my queen cannot go to a3 and control this diagonal. But my opponent played knight d7, and this was again something I had seen beforehand. One of my opponents in the Sunday regulars had played this. So I knew queen a3 was the best move, stopping my opponent from castling. And also look at the d6 square. It's very well controlled by white, and there are no black pawns to attack it. So that means my the d6 can become a really good square for my knight if I manage to get it somewhere. The problem is this knight on f6. So even if I capture the knight, he would capture with his knight on d7, and I would still not have a way for knight to come to d6. But somehow, luckily, my opponent made my job easier, and he captured the bishop. So now after capturing this, the knight is under attack and knight has to move. I was thinking he would play knight g4 attacking this pawn, and I had plans of giving up the pawn and still continuing with the knight d6 ideas. And there were a lot of calculations that I did, knight g4, like knight g4, knight d6. And if he captures, I play knight d6 check, king f8, king e7, king d7. There are multiple moves where with king d7 I had thought of doing castling. King f d7, I thought knight b6 check is very strong, where I might actually win the queen. And on king f8, I had thought of knight c4 check and capturing this knight. So I had calculated these variations, but he played knight d5, which I think was not again an inferior move. And I quickly played knight e4. I am very sure this is a good move because he cannot castle and a check is coming. Here he played queen e7, and obviously I had to play knight d6 check. I thought if he plays king f8, I'll just grab a pawn and have a better endgame, better chances at endgame. With king d7 or d8, I had seen that I can play c4 and then bring my rook to long castling and bring my rook to d1 and have a lot of discovered attacks. But he played king d7, so he didn't go for king f8. I played c4, knight b6, and I had thought that I can play do long castling here, but later I realized that he might have some chances after queen g5 check and then moving the king to c7. So I played rook to d1, and the idea is that if he plays king c7 here, I have knight b5 check and I'll win the queen, the discovered attack. So he didn't do that. He played queen f8, and I captured this pawn again. These are very straightforward, and this computer also suggests them. King c7. So here my worry was that if he plays king c7, I capture the rook. He captures my pawn, queen. I capture his queen, and then he captures my knight, and my pawns become weak. I didn't like this structure, so I came calculated somehow and came up with and found this move. I'm really proud of this move, queen d6 check, where I force him to exchange the queens. And you can see that after all these exchanges, my pawns are still have a good structure. Computer suggests rook h4 defense. I was thinking of c5, but then I thought knight d5 and I might have some challenges getting in. I didn't want him to have any counter play, so I played b3. He played rook f8, putting the rook on the open file. I didn't have a good way to put this rook on the open file, so I moved the rook up, and the idea was I can now bring the rook to any open file or even exchange after playing king e2. a5, rook g3 attacking the his pawn, rook f7. He had to defend. King e2. My idea is that play rook f3, exchange, and then just move the king up. And when I play rook f3, you notice that this rook does not have any way to defend itself. The exchange is forced. Knight c8, rook d2, just a small trap that if he captures my pawn, uh, I'll play rook g2 d3, and I can then capture the knight. He doesn't have any way to save the knight. b6, king d1. So I was here not very certain how to continue. So I was thinking like I can go somewhere like this if he plays c5 and then put some pressure. But after c5, I realized that he does not have any good move except knight a7. So if the knight goes to a7, I can exchange the rooks and not lose the pawn immediately. So I went with that plan and exchanged the rooks. He played knight c6. King to e4, knight to d4. If I capture, I was thinking of capturing because I already have an extra pawn that I can capture and get to another pawn advantage. But I thought maybe this would be more difficult to win. And there were cases where I had an extra pawn and lost to the endgame, so I didn't want to risk it. So I knew that if I play king e5, knight c6 is a check and I have to come back. But I thought, why not try? Just try it. And if he does that, then I'll not repeat. So he did the same and I didn't want to repeat, so I played rook d3. Idea is rook g3. He captured, I played rook g3, attacking the g7, knight f5, and I had calculated this rook g6, king e7. I don't know how I missed king e5. King e5 is such a simple move and wins on spot. I'm not sure what I did. I thought if I just attack, remove the knight, I can capture g7, or I always have this option of king e5. So g4, knight d6 check. Here king e5 check, and I move the king to f4. Again, I had calculated that if he saves the pawn on g7, he loses the pawn on e6 and then g6. And if keeps on defending this pawn, I'll just capture this pawn. And then after pushing some pawns, I'll have a pass pawn and win. So at this moment, my opponent resigned and I won. Now coming to the second game. So this was very straightforward, a very simple win for me. The second game, I would say, was the complete opposite, where I was always under pressure and I was playing against in black against Varat Dio, and from the opening itself, my opponent played some moves that I didn't know how to counter, and I was always under pressure. So if my opponent wanted, he could have grinded me, but somehow made didn't follow the best plan for his position, and I got some chances and I won. So let's go through the game. He started with knight f3. It can convert either into Reti opening or the English opening. And I just don't like my opponent playing that move because I'm not certain how to counter it. I played knight f6. I have some experience playing the bank point run field, so I thought why not? If he plays c4, I always can play d4 and counter it. And this knight also controls e4, so e4 directly is not an option currently. So c4, g6, knight c3. And now since the knight is controlling e4, he can play e4. So, and I didn't want to allow e4, otherwise d4 would be come under a lot of pressure. And then he also has d4, and he would really have a very strong center. So I played d5, which is kind of the Grunfeld move. He played e4, and here I thought maybe I'll capture the knight. He captures with the b pawn. Bishop moves here. d4 and c5, and we'll have a Grunfeld structure. Let me play the moves and show something like this. And this is very known Grunfeld position. And I thought we'll get to that, but after I captured in knight, he didn't capture with the b pawn. He captured with the d pawn, opening up the queen. And after this exchange, I felt the position is very equal. And I think when you are playing from black, you play for equality. So it was not a good option from my opponent to give up that first move advantage from white. Here, after this exchange, I thought I had multiple options: knight d7, knight c6, or simply play c5. And what I thought is I can play knight c6 because I saw this move bishop f4. But I would lose this pawn if I don't defend it. But I had seen some traps. Let me show you. Bishop f4, and here I can play f6. The plan is now I'll play e5 and block the bishop. But if the bishop captures now, I'll still play e5, and you would notice this bishop does not have any square. So after the game, I had briefly analyzed this and I realized I missed bishop b5 pinning the knight. But then I realized I can always play bishop d7, and if he captures the knight, then this pawn is attacked. And if he saves this pawn, let's say knight d2, I can play b6 and the bishop is trapped. Next move queen c7 and I can capture the bishop, or rook c8. And if he decides to save the bishop by playing something like bishop a5, I can capture this pawn. So I would not lose the piece, and I feel my minor pieces are better than his minor pieces, and I have better center control. So that would have been interesting, but he didn't. After knight c6, he didn't play this move bishop f4. He played bishop b5, pinning my knight, bishop d7, unpinning it. And here he played a4, which I didn't consider. But yeah, this was actually a strong move because I cannot play now a6 b5 moves. Bishop g7, king c2. I thought of doing long castling or attacking the bishop, but then I was scared that after long castling, this knight can come to g5 and there might be some traps on f7, like, and knight g5. And if I play something like f6 to defend the pawn, then knight f7, and it's a fork on my rooks. And I didn't want to play something like rook f8 or bishop e8 to defend the pawn. It just felt passive. So so before long castling, I played f6, and I didn't think my opponent would be, his pieces would so coordinate so well and so quickly. So I thought I had some time to just save myself, safeguard my position, and then improve the pieces slowly. But again, I was really mistaken here because after rook d1, long castling, bishop e6, here the threat is again so this is a common trap. I think this was in a game between Bobby Fischer and Boris Sparsky in their World Championship match, where they capture the h7 bishop and pawn moves forward, trapping the bishop. But this actually would not work here because let's say I just play any random move, then I feel bishop captures, and then this bishop can capture this pawn, or even the rook can capture the rook. uh, and I just felt this is not a good position. Somehow, I just didn't. I just felt like this. I don't want to exchange this early, and because I was playing for a draw, I was the higher rated player, and I wasn't playing for the draw. I was playing for the win, and I after this position, I was not certain how I can press him. So I thought maybe try to avoid exchanges. Maybe I'll just exchange my rook and let's see. But after bishop c4, e6, I realized my pieces were cramped, and he just played b4. I had thought of b4, but my calculation was I'll play the knight to e5, exchange, centralize my bishop, and if b5, I'll capture this pawn. There's a checkmate here, but I had thought I'll play b6 and I didn't see any threats at that moment, but I realized that the rook can still come to a8, and if king b7, then he can capture this. My rook has to capture, then he captures this pawn, he wins a pawn, and also my rook is pinned. So bishop g5 is actually a threat, and I might lose a piece. So I had to play king c8. It was very complicated, but let me show you what I had thought. So this happened, and here what I had thought was, if I capture, he captures, I play b6. I had seen there were no traps with the bishop, but here he can play. Okay, I had completely missed f4 also. f4 is also a threat. f4, bishop g7, and rook a7, king b8. This is just too strong. But what I had calculated over the board in that position was this: rook a8, king moves, captures, bishop captures. See, he is a pawn up, and I think this would be also very simple to convert. You just have to exchange pieces, and you would land in a winning position. So I just wanted to avoid that, and so I played a5, which according to the computer is the best move. Here I was expecting my opponent to play something like f4, e5, block my bishop, and I honestly cannot capture this pawn because g3 and my bishop would be trapped after rook h1. But he played rook d2, and I think his idea was playing the other rook to d1. And I noticed that then I cannot move most of my pieces, because after f4, e5, my bishop is getting trapped. This bishop cannot move with the rook here, because then this rook is pinned and I would lose this rook. So I played bishop e8 just so that I can exchange some rooks and relieve the pressure, and then slowly maybe play c6, exchange the pawns, get the bishop out, or even b6, move the king out, then play the bishop to d7, c8, and just to b7. A lot of plans, but I realized they were very slow. And I was thinking he would just capture, king captures, and just play the rook and again push forward with a lot of ideas and attacks. But he played rook e2, and after the game I asked him what was the reason, and he said he didn't want to exchange because he was in control of the pieces. But when you move your rook from the open file to a closed file, you are actually making your pieces weaker. So even if you are avoiding piece exchange, but it should not come at the cost of making your strong pieces weak. So this is what I think a mistake my opponent did here. I played g5 because I wanted to avoid f4 currently. So here I felt a little bit relieved that there's no f4, there's no pin on the d file. But and here he played a strange move h4. I really don't like h4. It's just a free pawn. And anyways, after f4 I have to play bishop f6, or even rook h1 I had to play bishop f6. So when he played f4, I thought, yeah, I anyway had to play bishop f6, so I'm not losing anything. Bishop f6 and b6. I was very happy with b6 because my the biggest problem of my position was this bishop didn't have good squares to move out or come out. I had also thought of something like e6, rook f8, and bishop g7 maybe, and just take out the bishop somehow. But I didn't have any concrete plans, to be honest. So I was feeling a little bit nervous about this bishop. But once he played b6, I cannot capture this pawn because then he would capture and it's a fork, and I would lose my a pawn. So, but I was very happy when he played. I played bishop c6, and you would see now my bishop is on this nice diagonal. Now he played bishop c5. I think his plan was just play f4, and this bishop is trapped. And here I calculated for a bit, maybe 10-15 minutes, and I'm proud of this move, rook g8. And the idea is, yeah, now I can capture the pawn on g2. If rook captures, then bishop captures e4, and it's a fork. So if the king moves, I'll capture the rook. he captured this pawn, and I was thinking I can still do the same, but I realized that after I capture, e5 is coming and this bishop is trapped. I'll show you. Rook g2 and e5. So even if I capture this rook, bishop captures, and I had to move this bishop away. So I thought I'll lose this pawn. Somehow I just didn't want. I thought he has some chances. He cannot play rook g1, rook h1 because of my bishop on c6. But still, I felt he has some chances, and my style of playing is very simple. That when I am in control, I didn't don't want to give any counter chances to my opponent. So I didn't go for it, and I just simply captured the pawn. I didn't, so that my bishop still has squares on this diagonal. He played king b3. I think he saw this tactics of check. So now, since the king is not here, this is not possible. And I played b6 because now I'm pushing his pieces back. Also, this pawn is defending this the other pawn. He played bishop f2, a very clever trap trick that if I capture the pawn on h2, he will capture the pawn on b6 with a check, and if I when I capture the bishop, I lose my rook. This is it still feels that I have a better position, but again, why take risk and give your opponent chances when you already have a better position? So I moved my king away, and now you notice there's no bishop b6 check. So I can capture the pawn, and if he captures my pawn, I'll capture the rook. After the rook action, I'll capture the bishop and win. e5, bishop d8. Again, I could have played bishop e7, but I thought just play bishop b8. Even if he has some plans like trying to put pressure on this b6 pawn, my bishop is already there to defend, so he would not have any chances. Rook to e1, bishop takes. So bishop is controlling this square and the queening square. So rook has to move to h2, h3, and you would notice this rook does not have any squares to move now. That rook is trapped by the bishop and pawn. Bishop d3, rook g4. Wow, we have been playing a lot of computer moves. I didn't realize that we were playing actually the best move. I thought I wasn't doing well. f5, bishop g4. The idea is I'll play bishop f4 and attack the trapped rook and capture it. And bishop d4 again. Here I realize that if I play bishop to f4, he has bishop check, bishop captures, rook captures, and this bishop is pinned. If I capture his rook, he will capture my rook. And again, I didn't want to give any chances, or I felt that this rook is trapped and I should not mess with the structure. So this is what I felt, that if I do, he can play this check, and I'm still winning, but I thought maybe I'll lose this pawn, and I didn't want that to happen. So bishop g5, bishop d, and I played h5, so just to defend the rook. Maybe it was not necessary. Maybe I'm just trying to trying to stop any counterplay. Maybe there was no actual counterplay. Uh, bishop e3. I had thought of this rook g3 and bishop d1, and I somehow felt that after I exchange these pieces, it will be more simpler to win. So I just played with bishop f1. Bishop captures, and this is what I had calculated, that if he captures with the rook, then rook g2, and I have I can easily queen my pawn, or I can even capture this bishop and I will have an extra exchange, and then I can still queen the pawn and win. Very simple. And if he plays something like bishop d4, I can still capture the rook and gain an exchange. And even after getting the exchange, the thing is I can still play rook g2, and there's this exchange that he has to do, and my pawn will be very near to queening. Bishop takes g5, bishop. Bishop takes e2. Here he didn't capture and attack my rook. I had already seen this option. I had seen that I can capture the bishop. He captures my rook. I capture this pawn. I have he if he captures, I can give a check and capture his rook, and I had a pass pawn. But then I had heard that I was a bit skeptical that with opposite color bishop there might be some drawing chances, and I didn't want to take any risks. So I played this move bishop d3 check, and the idea is that if the king moves, I'll just move my rook out, and I again have an exchange up, and if he captures, I'll just exchange the rooks as well, and then I can capture all of his pawns one by one, and I would still have the h pawn as a passer. So felt like winning. I am actually winning as per computer as well. He played bishop c2, and then this is again calculated. If you play, I had thought that whatever he plays, I'll play rook g2 and I'll then win. But he made my task easier. He played captured with the king and rook g2 check. Here it's forced to capture or he will lose the rook. And once he captures my rook, I'll capture his rook, and there's no way for him to stop the pawn to queen. So here at this position, my opponent resigned, and do let and I think I'll end. This was the end of the first day where I scored 2 out of 2. Uh, I hope you enjoyed the video, learned something, especially on the Caro Kann. I feel the first game was very instructive on how to take advantage of small opening errors. And do let me know in the comments if you want something different or this is actually good. Thank you. I'll come up with the next games of the next day soon. So till then, have a good one.